Most people don't really think about window washers. You might notice them for a second while riding an elevator in a tall building, a small metal platform hanging outside the glass. Someone slowly dragging a squeegee across a window hundreds of feet above the street. Then the elevator keeps moving. The doors open, and you forget about them. But if you've ever stood near the edge of a skyscraper and looked down, you understand something most people don't. There's nothing under them. No floor, no railing, no safety net. Just a narrow metal platform, a couple of steel cables, and hundreds of feet of open air. Now imagine doing that job every single day. Imagine stepping off a rooftop early in the morning, lowering yourself down the side of a building, while the entire city exists far below your feet. For most window washers, the biggest fear isn't actually heights. It's equipment failure, a loose harness, a cable malfunction, a motor that suddenly stops working. But sometimes, the scariest moments have nothing to do with the equipment. Sometimes the fear comes from something far more unpredictable: people. The following story comes from someone who had been washing windows on high-rise buildings for nearly a decade. By that point, heights didn't scare him the way they used to. At least, that's what he told people. When you first start the job, your legs shake the first few times you step onto the platform. Most workers grip the rails so hard their knuckles turn white. But eventually your brain adjusts. The process becomes routine. Clip the harness, step onto the platform, lower yourself down the side of the building. And for the next few hours, the entire city exists beneath your feet. He once said the strangest part of the job isn't the height, it's the silence. When you're hundreds of feet above the street, the normal city noise fades away. Traffic becomes distant. Car horns turn into faint echoes. Most of the time, all you hear is wind, and sometimes, the cables creaking. On this particular morning, he and his partner were cleaning windows on a 42-story office building. It was a clear day, the kind where the sky looks almost too bright. They had already cleaned the top floors and were slowly descending down the building. About halfway down, he was wiping a streak from one of the windows when the platform suddenly jerked. Not violently, just enough to make him stop moving. At first he assumed the motor had caught for a moment. That happens occasionally if the cables twist slightly. But then the platform shifted again. This time more noticeably. He felt his boots slide slightly on the metal floor. The platform was tilting. At first it was subtle, maybe just a few degrees. Then it kept going. 10 degrees. 15. Within seconds the entire platform was hanging at an angle. He grabbed the side rail as his body slid toward the lower corner. His partner nearly lost his footing and slammed into the safety cable. "Hold on," his partner shouted. The wind carried his voice away almost instantly. Then they heard it. A sharp metallic crack. It was loud, but short, like something heavy snapping under pressure. Both of them looked up immediately. One of the steel suspension cables had failed. The thick line that had been holding the platform level was now dangling loosely above them. For a moment neither of them spoke. The platform now hung diagonally, supported only by the remaining cable and their harnesses. He slowly looked down. That was when the height really hit him again. Hundreds of feet below them, traffic moved like tiny dots through the streets. People looked like ants crossing sidewalks. From that height the city almost didn't feel real anymore. He reached for the motor controls. Nothing happened. He pressed the button again. Still nothing. The motor had stopped responding completely. They were stuck, just hanging there, tilted sideways against the glass. Then came the worst part: waiting. Because when something like that happens, rescue doesn't arrive instantly. At first the wind pushed the platform gently against the building. Then it pulled it away again. Back and forth. Each movement made the remaining cable groan above their heads. Minutes passed. Then more. The entire time he kept staring up at the cable above them. Watching. Listening. Because every so often, they would hear a faint sound from above. A quiet metallic strain. Like the steel was slowly being pulled tighter and tighter. At one point the platform shifted again slightly, making both men freeze. And that's when something else happened. Someone inside the building noticed them. Through the glass window directly in front of them, a man in an office stepped closer. At first the man just stood there watching. People do that sometimes. Workers hanging outside a building tend to attract attention. The man walked closer to the glass. He stared at them for a moment. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile. More like the kind someone gives when they're amused by something. The window washer tried gesturing toward him, pointing upward, trying to signal that something was wrong. The man watched him for a few seconds. Then he slowly lifted his hand and knocked on the glass. 3 slow taps. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was faint through the window, but somehow it felt louder than anything else. Then the man leaned forward. He placed both hands against the glass and pressed his face closer, just staring, watching them struggle to keep their balance on the tilted platform. The wind pushed the platform again. The remaining cable groaned loudly above them. The washer looked back at the man inside, hoping he would leave to call someone. Instead, the man simply tilted his head, still smiling. Then he slowly pulled his phone out of his pocket. For a second, the washer thought the man was finally calling for help. But instead, he raised the phone and started recording. He stood there filming them. 2 men hanging hundreds of feet above the street, while their platform slowly swayed in the wind. The washer later said that moment scared him more than the cable snapping, because in that moment he realized something. From the inside of that building, they weren't people. They were entertainment. The man filmed for nearly a full minute before finally walking away. Rescue crews eventually arrived about 20 minutes later. Firefighters lowered ropes from the rooftop and pulled both workers back to safety. Both men survived. But the window washer later said he never forgot the look on that man's face. That calm smile. The way he just stood there, watching. Because when you're hanging hundreds of feet above the ground, completely helpless, the last thing you expect is for someone on the other side of the glass to treat it like a show. Window washers see things most people don't. They're outside office buildings, apartments, hotels. Sometimes even penthouses hundreds of feet above the street. Most of the time they're only a few feet away from someone's living room, separated by nothing but glass. And usually, people inside don't even notice them. But sometimes, they do. And sometimes the things a window washer sees through that glass are things they wish they hadn't. One window washer shared a story that still bothers him years later. He had been doing high-rise work for a long time. Long enough that heights didn't bother him anymore. The first few months on the job are terrifying, but eventually your brain adjusts. You stop looking down. You focus on the glass, the squeegee, the routine. That day he was working on a luxury apartment tower in downtown Seattle. The kind of building with floor-to-ceiling glass walls and penthouse units that cost more than most people will ever earn in their lifetime. It was late afternoon. The sun was starting to set, reflecting orange light across the windows of the building. He had headphones in while he worked. Just music. Nothing unusual. The motor slowly lowered his platform down the side of the building as he cleaned each section of glass. Stop. Spray. Wipe. Move down another few feet. He repeated the same routine for hours. Eventually he reached one of the highest penthouse floors. That's when something caught his attention. The curtains inside the apartment were partially open. Normally he tries not to look inside people's homes. Window washers are trained to focus on the glass, not what's behind it. But something about the room felt strange. The lights were off inside the apartment, but someone was clearly moving around in the darkness. At first he assumed it was just a resident walking through their living room. He kept working, trying not to stare. But then he noticed something else. There were 2 figures in the room. One of them was standing. The other was on the floor. At first he thought maybe someone had dropped something, or maybe someone had slipped. But then the standing figure moved suddenly. There was a fast downward motion, like an arm swinging. The person on the floor tried to crawl backward. That's when the situation stopped feeling normal. He froze, his hand still holding the squeegee against the glass. From his position outside the building he had a clear view through the window, but he couldn't hear anything. No voices, no sound, just movement. The person on the floor kept trying to move away, and the standing figure kept stepping toward them. He realized in that moment he might be witnessing something violent, something he wasn't supposed to see. But there was nothing he could do. He was literally hanging off the side of the building, hundreds of feet above the ground, tethered to a metal platform. No way to get inside. No way to reach anyone quickly. And then the person inside noticed him. The standing figure stopped moving. Slowly, they turned toward the window, toward him. For a moment neither of them moved. He said the man's expression was completely blank. Not shocked, not angry, not scared, just staring. Like he had known someone might be watching. The man began walking toward the window, slowly, step by step. The washer suddenly realized how exposed he was. He was outside the glass, hanging in midair, with nothing between them except a pane of glass. The platform swayed slightly in the wind. His first instinct was to lower himself down the building, but the motor controls were on the other side of the platform. He had to step carefully across the narrow metal floor to reach them. Every second he could feel the man inside getting closer. He finally grabbed the control lever and lowered the platform a few feet. As he did, the man inside reached the window, and for a moment, they were face to face, just inches apart through the glass. The washer said he'll never forget the look in the man's eyes, because it wasn't panic, it wasn't fear. It looked more like irritation, like he was annoyed someone had interrupted something. Then the man slowly reached up and pulled the curtains closed. They slammed shut instantly. The washer lowered himself down the rest of the building as fast as the motor would allow. Once he reached the ground, he immediately called emergency services and told them what he thought he had seen. Police arrived quickly and went up to the penthouse unit. But when they entered the apartment, they found nothing. No broken furniture, no blood, no sign that anyone had been inside at all. The apartment had apparently been empty for several weeks. According to building management, the owner was overseas and the unit hadn't been occupied. No one had accessed it that day. At least, that's what they said. The washer still insists he saw two people inside that room. One standing, one on the floor. And he says he'll never forget the moment the man inside the apartment looked straight at him. Because from that height, hanging outside a building, there's a strange realization that hits you. Something happens inside that room. You're the only person who might ever know. But sometimes, the most terrifying moments for window washers don't involve people at all. Sometimes, it's the sky. Because when you're suspended hundreds of feet above the ground, there's only one thing separating you from the clouds. And sometimes, the weather changes faster than anyone expects. Now imagine doing that job every single day. Stepping off a rooftop early in the morning, lowering yourself down the side of a building, while the entire city exists far below your feet. For most window washers, the biggest fear isn't heights. It's equipment failure, a loose harness, a cable malfunction, a motor that suddenly stops responding. But sometimes, the most terrifying moments don't come from the equipment. Sometimes they come from the sky itself. One window washer shared a story from late in his career that changed the way he saw the job forever. He had been washing windows for over 20 years. By the time he was in his late 40s, he had worked on buildings taller than most people will ever visit. He used to joke that he had the best office view in the world. But there was one day he never forgot. He and his crew were scheduled to clean the windows on a 70-story tower. The forecast that morning had said the skies would be clear all day, and for the first few hours, they were. The sun was out. The air was calm. Just another routine shift. He clipped into his harness, stepped onto the suspended platform, and began lowering himself down from the rooftop. 20 floors, 30 floors. The city stretched out beneath him like a map. Traffic looked tiny. People on sidewalks were barely visible. From that height, everything below almost feels unreal. He said the strange thing about working that high up is how quiet it becomes. The noise of the city fades away. All you really hear is the wind. And sometimes, the cables creaking above you. About 20 floors down from the roof, something changed. At first it was subtle. A light push against the platform. What? Nothing unusual. But then the sky started darkening. He looked up and noticed something rolling in across the skyline. The storm. And it was moving fast. Within minutes the wind began hitting the side of the building in powerful bursts. The platform shifted slightly. Left, then right. The steel cables above him began groaning under the sudden pressure. He grabbed the controls and tried to raise the platform back toward the roof. That's the normal procedure when weather starts getting dangerous. But strong winds make that difficult. The platform began swinging. Slowly at first. A few feet away from the building, then back toward the glass. The next gust pushed it even further. 5 feet, then 10. The cables stretched tight above him. The entire platform began swaying like a pendulum. At one point a powerful gust lifted the platform slightly before slamming it back against the building. The impact rattled the metal beneath his boots. The wind roared past his ears. And the sky above him had turned dark gray. But the moment that terrified him the most didn't happen right away. It happened when the wind pushed the platform farther out than before. So far, that the platform began turning slightly. He felt the shift beneath his feet, the angle changing. And suddenly, he wasn't facing the building anymore. He was facing outward, toward the open sky. He said that's the moment when the fear really hit him. Because when you work as a window washer, you always have the building in front of you. The glass, the wall, something solid. But now, there was nothing there. Just clouds. What? an empty air stretching for hundreds of feet below him. He looked down. The streets were so far below that cars looked like tiny moving dots. From that height, a fall wouldn't even feel real. The platform swayed again. The cables groaned loudly above him. For a moment he genuinely thought one of them might snap. He gripped the railing with both hands and slowly worked his way back to the motor controls. Every movement had to be careful. The wind kept pushing the platform further from the building. He raised the platform slowly, foot by foot, the motor whining as it struggled against the wind. The entire time the platform kept swinging slightly, each gust making the cable strain again. Eventually, the edge of the rooftop came back into view. When the platform finally reached the roof, two co-workers rushed over and helped pull him onto solid ground. He said the moment his boots touched the concrete, his legs nearly gave out. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely unclasp the harness. He stood there for a few minutes just staring at the cables above the building, watching them sway in the wind. He finished the job that day, but something about that moment stayed with him. Not long after, he retired from the job. Because once you've spent enough time hanging off buildings, you begin to realize something. Every shift depends on a few simple things. A couple of steel cables, a motor, and the weather staying calm. Remove just one of those things, and the job can go from routine to fatal. So the next time you're standing inside a skyscraper, looking out through a perfectly clean window, and you see someone hanging outside on a small platform, just remember something. They're standing hundreds of feet above the ground, with nothing but air beneath them. And sometimes, all it takes is a single snap.